Hello, this is Whispers in the Rain. Welcome to tonight's scary story reading. One to keep you company as the storm rolls in. Comment where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. Let the rain drown the noise of the outside world and let the darkness take over from here. Natalie backed away, stumbling against the frame of the front door, but it slammed shut behind her with a bone-rattling bang. She fumbled for the knob, but it was gone. Nothing but smooth, featureless wood. The house had sealed itself. Trapped her again. The other Natalie stood still, a mannequin draped in her own face. No breath, no warmth, just presence. Eyes like tunnels leading deep into the earth. "You can't run," it whispered. "You were born in this house. Not in body, but in memory. A seed planted, watered by grief." The floor under Natalie's feet trembled. She looked down. Tiny cracks spread like veins across the floorboards, and from them, roots began to emerge, searching. "No," she whispered. "You're not real. You're a memory, an echo." The other Natalie stepped forward. "That's all you are too. Just a page in a story told too many times. Just a root trying to grow in ash." Natalie turned and ran. Down the hall, past the staircase, into the parlor. But every door she tried now opened into the same space. A windowless room, circular and lined with mirrors. Some were shattered, some fogged. All of them reflected not her, but other lives, Clara, the creature, her mother, Dr. Kent, even strangers she'd never seen. Each version of her bore different wounds. One was faceless. One was split down the middle, sap leaking from the gap. One knelt in soil, burying her own limbs like roots. Natalie screamed. The mirrors shuddered. From behind her, the voice spoke again, gentler this time. "Do you want to forget?" She turned. The older version of herself was there, arms outstretched. "I can take the pain," the thing said. "I can hold the weight. I can let you rest." Natalie's knees buckled. Her mind was unraveling, torn between memory and invention. The line between her and the house had dissolved. She heard whispers behind the mirrors now. Names, dates, whispered lullabies. One by one, the reflections stepped forward, pressing their palms to the glass from the inside. "Join us," they said. Natalie clenched her teeth. "No, I'm not a page. I'm not your story." She reached in her coat pocket. Her fingers closed around the broken root she'd cut from her hand. It still twitched faintly. She bit down on it. The taste was bitter, sharp, filled with years. The house screamed again. The mirrors shattered inward. The reflected selves shrieked, twisted, and crumbled like ash. Natalie stood amidst falling glass, blood on her lips. And far beneath the floorboards, something shifted, something ancient, something furious. The house was waking up. The scream of the house wasn't a sound. It was a sensation, rattling through the marrow of her bones, echoing in the pit of her skull like the cry of something ancient being dragged from slumber. The walls groaned inward, blistering and bulging with moisture, as if the house itself was breathing harder, faster. Natalie ran. Bloodied and barefoot, she pushed through the hanging roots and swinging doors that no longer stayed where they belonged. Rooms shifted behind her, reshaping themselves with each blink of her eye. One moment she was in the upstairs hall, the next in the nursery, the next in the dark closet beneath the stairs. There were no exits now, only deeper. The house was folding in on her. "Natalie," the voices sang. Her name came from inside the walls, from the chandeliers, from the plumbing. "You're ready." She staggered through a narrow passage that hadn't been there before, its walls soft, like muscle wrapped in old wallpaper. The floor sank beneath her with each step, squishing wetly. There was a smell now, thick and sour, like old milk and decayed wood. The hall ended at a door. No que llore. Only the shape of a handprint. Hers. She hesitated. Every nerve in her body screamed at her to turn back, but there was no back anymore. Only forward. Only inward. She pressed her palm to the door. It opened like flesh splitting. Inside was a cavernous chamber, miles beneath where any basement should be. Roots hung like chandeliers. The ceiling was lost in shadows. And at the center of the room, cradled in a nest of knotted wood, was a shape. A woman, or what was left of one. Her body was made of bark and bone. Her face was stitched from thousands of mouths, whispering in unison. Her arms had grown long and root-like, her fingertips tunneling into the soil that breathed and pulsed beneath her. The mother of the house, Clara, Natalie whispered. The thing turned toward her. Clara is one of me. You are another. We are the memory of pain, the hunger of grief, the root that outlives the tree. Natalie trembled. I'm not part of you. The mother tilted her head. You already are. You always were. And from behind the mother, figures began to rise from the soil. Clara, Dr. Kent, her mother, the clerk from the archive, even the girl from the photograph Natalie had found long ago. All of them rooted, all of them hollow-eyed. 1,000 stories, 1,000 endings. Natalie dropped to her knees. But then, through the murk of her thoughts, she felt something else. A spark, something the house had not buried. Choice. She reached into her coat once more. Past the roots, past the journal scrap she hadn't realized she still carried. The lighter. With shaking hands, she lit it. The flame flickered, feeble in the damp. The mother hissed. You would burn us all? It asked. No, Natalie said. Just your ending. And she hurled the flame into the soil. The house began to burn, not with fire, but with light. The light didn't consume the house like fire. It peeled it. The walls split open with groaning cries, shedding layers of memory like skin. The roots that held the spectral figures to the ground curled and blackened, crumbling to ash with soft, papery sighs. The mother shrieked, a sound that collapsed the ceiling of the chamber, raining soil and bone from above. Her tree limbs flailed, striking beams, splintering supports. But her power was waning. The flame Natalie had thrown into the root bed pulsed now, like a heartbeat, swelling into a blinding core. You cannot destroy memory, the mother cried, her many mouths opening at once. No, Natalie whispered, stepping closer. But you can let it go. The floor heaved beneath her, the house attempting to remake itself. Walls rising, staircases shifting, doors blooming where none had been. But the root system that held it all together was now unraveling. What had been a fortress of grief was detaching, its vines curling inward in slow, agonizing retreat. The figures, Clara, Kent, her mother, began to collapse. Not violently, peacefully. Their bodies faded, unrooting, dispersing into motes of amber light that drifted upward like fireflies. One by one, they looked at Natalie with faces no longer hollow, just tired, relieved. Clara's light lingered longest. Thank you, she said. Her voice was clear now, free of distortion. You remembered me without becoming me. And then she was gone. The mother screamed, her form collapsing inward. Her bark cracked and split, sap gushing like blood. She reached toward Natalie one last time. Fingers gnarled, desperate, but they passed through her crumbling midair. The chamber imploded, not with violence, but reversal. Walls folded in, roots recoiled, the soil sucked itself downward into a single point of darkness, like memory being forgotten. The flame flared bright, and Natalie was falling. She awoke in a hospital bed, for in her arm, sunlight through the window. A nurse smiled at her from the doorway. You're awake. They found you unconscious in the forest. You've been out for 2 days. Natalie blinked, lips dry. The house. The nurse paused. You mean that old Devane property? Fire took what was left of it last night. Nothing standing now but scorched dirt. Natalie turned her head. Her hand lay on the blanket. Smooth, unmarked, no root beneath the skin. But as the nurse stepped away, Natalie glanced at the tray beside her. A single folded note had been placed atop a paper cup of water. No handwriting, just pressed into the paper with what looked like a root tip. It read, She forgets nothing, but you remember only what you choose. That is how stories die. Natalie closed her eyes. Outside the window, the sun rose higher, and for the first time in a long while, the wind smelled only like morning. Years passed. Natalie never returned to Pine Hollow. She moved west, changed her number, lived a quiet life in a small mountain town where no one knew her name or what she'd survived. The roots beneath her skin never returned. The dreams stopped. Most nights were peaceful now, but she never forgot. Sometimes, in the early hours of the morning, just before the sun cracked the sky, she'd wake with the sound of creaking wood in her ears. Not loud, just faint enough to make her question if it had ever been real. She kept the scorched page from the journal, framed and hung in her study. A reminder, we are stories first, people second. 10 years later, in a different state, a group of contractors broke ground on a new subdivision. The plot of land had once been forest, but that was long cleared. What remained was good soil, rich and dark. Or so they thought. One worker struck something with his shovel. He thought it was a buried pipe. It wasn't. It was bone. Nearby, another worker found something else tangled in a clump of dirt. A fragment of wallpaper, soaked through with black sap. When he held it up to the light, he could see the outline of a handprint burned into the fabric. Later that week, a foreman spotted a girl standing at the edge of the trees. Pale, dressed in yellow. Eyes too large. She didn't speak. She only smiled, and then walked backward into the woods. They found nothing when they searched. The forest is gone now, but something underneath still grows. Roots you can't see, memories you didn't plant. And sometimes, if you drive past those quiet streets late at night, you'll see a house that shouldn't be there. Just for a second, crouched low, watching, waiting to be remembered. Natalie hadn't meant to keep the houseplant. It had been a gift, left anonymously on the porch of her new home, potted in old ceramic, with a note that read only, for your healing. She almost threw it away. Almost. But something about it was familiar. The curling of its leaves. The dark velvet sheen of the soil. The scent, like memory caught in rain. So she kept it, placing it in the window where it would catch the light. For a time, it didn't grow. Then, slowly, silently, it did. New shoots emerged. Thick, tangled, not like anything she'd seen in gardening books. They grew downward, reaching through the slats of the windowsill, curling along the floorboards. She trimmed them, pruned them, but they always came back. She told herself it was stress. Her mind playing tricks again, the old trauma resurfacing. But some nights, the air in the room shifted. The plant breathed, and it whispered, not in words, in reminders. Tiny dreams started to return. Clara's face, her mother's hands, the sound of the door slamming shut, and something else, something new. On the final night, Natalie woke to the sound of roots crawling across the floor. She sat up. The plant had moved. Its ceramic pot was cracked open on its side, and the vines had spread outward like veins across the living room, snaking toward the basement door she hadn't opened in months. And from below that door came a knock. Just once. Soft. Tall. Then a voice. May I come in now? Natalie rose to her feet. She did not run. She did not scream. She walked slowly to the basement, placed her hand on the knob. She spoke with calm, with certainty. No. And when she turned the handle, the house did not weep. It sighed, and behind her, the plant turned to ash. The roots shriveled, and for the first time, the soil beneath her feet felt clean. The story never ends, but sometimes the seed doesn't take. Far from Natalie's quiet home, nestled in the back stacks of a regional library no one visited anymore, there sat a box. Unmarked, dull gray, the kind of thing clerks forget to inventory. Inside was a folder. Inside the folder, photographs, blackened with mildew, warped at the corners. Handwritten notes in a looping cursive. A tape cassette labeled only. ID vein /subject 6B. At the bottom, folded neatly, a single page torn from a ledger. Do not file. Do not copy. Burn after review. But it hadn't been burned. It had been archived. And tonight, under flickering fluorescent lights, a young woman in a cardigan and thick glasses slid open the box for the first time in decades. She'd been cataloging local folklore. She thought this was just another haunted house myth. She clicked the cassette into a dusty player. Press play. At first, only static. Then, a low creaking like would understrain. A voice followed, thick with static, feminine, but not quite human. Hello, Clara. The archivist's breath caught. That wasn't her name. But somehow, the tape knew. She leaned closer. The tape hissed louder. The lights above buzzed, flickered. Do you remember the door? She paused the tape, but the voice continued. Do you remember what you let in? The cassette deck was off. The voice was in the room now, and in the corner of her vision, just beyond the edge of the last bookshelf, a shadow moved. Slowly, stretching, reaching toward her feet like a root sniffing for warmth. The archivist rose, heart hammering, breath sharp. Behind her, the tape hissed a final phrase. She forgets nothing. The light above her popped and died. The room went dark, and somewhere in the stacks, something began to grow. Marla Keene had spent 5 years cataloging the dead. Not bodies, histories, records, ledgers, obituaries yellowed and crumbling from disuse. She worked in the Pine Hollow Historical Archive, a squat brick building no one visited unless they were very old or very lost. It suited her. Quiet, orderly, full of secrets nobody remembered. That was why, on a cold Thursday morning in October, Marla took special interest in the unmarked box left by the freight elevator. There was no record of it in the system. No barcode, no note of donation. But it was old. She could tell from the way the tape had yellowed along the seams, the brittle smell of parchment inside, like smoke and mold and something deeper. The label read only, Edivane. Marla frowned. The name rang faint bells. Edivane had been a manor or estate, something infamous from the early 1900s. She thought she'd seen it in a local folklore article years ago, connected to a rash of disappearances. The town had a long memory for tragedies, but a short one for specifics. She opened the box. Photos, black and white, many blurred or water-damaged. Notes in cursive, half illegible. Police reports. A single cassette labeled Subject 6B, and a field journal filled with strange sketches. Rooms drawn over and over with shifting walls, bleeding doors, and tree roots growing from the floorboards. On the inside flap of the box was a warning, handwritten in blocky red ink. Do not file. Do not copy. Burn after review. She chuckled. Real dramatic, she muttered, and lifted the cassette. The player on her desk hadn't worked in years, but she had her own small tape recorder from grad school. She slipped the cassette in and pressed play. At first, static, then something like creaking wood, distant, rhythmic, like a house breathing. Then a voice. Hello, Clara. She flinched. The voice was distorted, feminine, calm, but it spoke with too many echoes, like other mouths whispered just behind it. What disturbed her more was the name it used. She didn't know a Clara, but for one horrible second, it felt like the voice was speaking to her. Marla stopped the tape, ejected it. Her fingers trembled slightly. Old junk, she muttered. Just atmosphere. But when she turned back to the box, the photographs had changed. She was sure of it. The image on top had shown a crumbling staircase. Now it showed her desk, and a figure standing just behind her. Marla froze. The photo was grainy, black and white, but unmistakable. Her desk, the stacks of reports, the chipped mug, the tangle of cords. And there, behind her chair, a shadow. A figure. Tall. Thin. Blurred around the edges like the negative had been smudged. But the shape was human. Almost. Her throat went dry. She looked behind her. Nothing. Just the quiet hum of the archive's outdated HVAC, the cold metal racks of shelving, and rows upon rows of forgotten lives. She picked up the photograph with shaking hands. The back was unmarked. She slid it under her desk lamp, squinting closer. There were words scratched faintly in the lower right corner. Don't turn around again. She dropped the photo. A rational voice in her mind piped up. Probably a prank. Maybe old archive staff had left it behind as a joke. Archivists could be a weird bunch. She herself had labeled a shelf, necrotic tax returns, once just to see if anyone noticed. But this wasn't funny. She reached for the cassette again. Ejected it. Her thumb brushed something on the back of the tape. An indentation. A symbol carved lightly into the plastic. A tree. Its trunk narrow, its roots deep. She'd seen it before. In the journal from a box. Marla flipped open the field journal again, scanning past frantic sketches of windows that melted, halls that folded in on themselves, staircases that turned into teeth. And there, near the center of the book, a drawing of the same tree. Beneath it, in tight, desperate scrawl. The house remembers what was buried. The archivist only wakes it. She leaned back, heart thudding. This was too deliberate, too personal. Not a prank, not random. She grabbed her phone to search for a Devane house. The connection in the archive basement was spotty, but after a few seconds, results trickled in. A news article from 1997. Arson suspected in fire at abandoned manor. A police file. Unsolved disappearances Clara Holden, Kent Avery, Margaret Edefana. And then a forum thread. Places you shouldn't go in Pine Hollow. The top comment. A Devane house is gone, but sometimes it comes back. Not in places. In people. Her phone died. Fully charged minutes ago. In a sudden silence, Marla realized the archive had gone still. The building always made noise, settling, humming, pipes groaning in the walls. Now, silence. Then, creak. One soft step, somewhere in the aisle behind her. Not imagined. Not the building. A footfall. Marla stood. She picked up the field journal and slowly, carefully turned to face the stacks. Something moved just out of view. Not a person. Not quite. A shape unfolding from between the shelves, unfolding wrong, like too many limbs have been packed into too small a frame. And from the dark, a voice like breath through paper. Archivist, you open the box. Now open the door. Marla backed away, clutching the journal to her chest, the skin of her palms damp with cold sweat. The thing between the shelves didn't advance. It just unfolded, bent at wrong angles. Its surface was pale and grainy, almost translucent, like a mannequin carved from pulp paper soaked too long in water. It didn't breathe. It crackled. The overhead lights flickered once, twice, then popped. Darkness. Marla fumbled for her phone again. Dead. She turned toward the emergency exit, heart pounding, but her legs felt slow, as if the air had thickened around her knees. She took one step, then stopped. A faint glow lit the path in front of her. Not from above, from the shelves. Each book on the nearest stack was softly illuminated from within, like paper lanterns lit by inner fire. The glow pulsed, synchronized, rhythmic, as if the archive were breathing. And from within those stacks, the whispered voices rose again. Not in English, not even in words, but in emotion, grief, hunger, loss, a thirst that tasted like remembering. The figure stepped forward, its feet silent, its body barely touching the floor. Its face was almost human, except it had no mouth. Just a thin black seam where lips might have been sewn shut. It reached one long arm toward her, and its fingers, 5 at first, began to split. 6, 7, 8, then 9, thin as brushstrokes, trembling like they were being blown by wind that wasn't there. Marla didn't scream. Instead, she did what she always did when something disturbed her. She turned to the records. She flipped open the field journal and looked at the most recent entry. The handwriting was sharper here, frantic. Subject 6B breached threshold during transfer. Structure dislocated. Sound carried through ink. She heard it in the margins. Below that, a diagram. The tree again. This time, its roots extended downward into what looked like corridors. Rooms? Archive. One room had been circled in red, labeled simply Stacklight. Marla looked up. The label for the nearest aisle, painted in chipped stencil. Stacklight row. Behind her, the thing tilted its head. It hadn't touched her yet, but she felt the weight of its presence against her ribs, like her lungs were being asked to remember drowning. She gripped the journal tighter and walked toward Stacklight row. If there were answers, they'd be buried here. The lights above the aisle flickered back to life, only here. One by one, as if something wanted her to come closer. As if the archive itself was awakening. And somewhere deeper in the stacks, far from where she stood, a door began to open. Not with hinges, but with roots. The Stacklight row was colder than the rest of the archive. Marla moved carefully, her sneakers squeaking against the polished concrete. The fluorescent lights above clicked on one by one as she passed, each humming softly, casting long shadows across the tightly packed shelves. The books here were different, older, bound in leather and cloth, many without titles. Some were swollen with moisture, their pages warped and gray. Others had thin thread tied around them, as if they'd been bound to keep something in. As she walked, the light behind her dimmed again. Not all at once, just slowly as if being swallowed. She didn't look back. Instead, she ran her fingers along the spines, searching for any clue, anything that might explain the box, the thing in the dark, the voice on the tape. And then she found it. A small green book, no larger than a postcard. Its spine read, "A Divine Collection, Seed Case Number 1. Her fingers tingled as she touched it. The leather was warm. Too warm. She pulled it down and opened it. The first page was blank. The second was filled with hand-drawn symbols, circles nested in spirals, eyes enclosed in thorns, the silhouette of a house with a tree growing through the roof. Below it, a single line written in pencil. The ink is not written. It is grown. She turned the page and stopped. There, sketched in charcoal, was her face. Wide-eyed, frightened. The same cardigan she was wearing now. The same messy bun. The background showed the very aisle she was standing in, stacklight row. Beneath the sketch, something new was being added. In real time, dark lines forming a shape. Another figure standing behind her. She spun around. Nothing. The aisle was empty. The lights buzzed. She looked back at the page. Now the figure behind her was closer. Its mouth, still sewn shut, had begun to leak dark ink from the corners. Ink that bled down the page, soaking through the paper like it was trying to escape. Marla slammed the book shut and stuffed it into her satchel. From somewhere deeper in the archive, a sound echoed out, a door unlatching. And then, a scream, not from building, from a tape recorder. Still off, still in her bag. The scream wasn't human, or if it had once been, something had twisted it along the way. It echoed inside her skull, not around it. Marla broke into a run, past the shelves, toward the main stairwell, toward something she knew now. The archive was no longer a building. It was becoming a vessel, and she was no longer alone. She had never been alone. Marla burst through the swinging double doors of the main stairwell, nearly slipping on the dusty tiles. The bulb overhead flickered dimly but held, casting a weak halo around her. She didn't look back. She couldn't. She descended 3 flights, feet echoing against the narrow concrete steps, until she reached the lowest level of the archive, the basement sorting room. No one used it anymore. The air down here was thicker, older, like it hadn't been disturbed in years. But when she pushed open the rusted door marked unsorted holdings, the first thing she noticed was that the room wasn't empty. The center table had been cleared, neatly, intentionally, and on it sat a single object, a rotary telephone. It was pale green, the cord wrapped in fraying cloth, the dial pristine. It shouldn't have been working. There was no line, no electricity. But as she stepped inside, the phone began to ring. Marla stared at it, her breath hitching. 1 ring, 2, 3. She reached for it and paused. Her hand hovered over the receiver. The ringing stopped. A silence hung in the air. Then, slowly, the dial rotated on its own, clicking softly, 1 number at a time. The receiver lifted from the cradle by itself, floating half an inch into the air, and a voice hissed from the mouthpiece, quiet, trembling. The house found her again. She opened the box. Marla backed away, knocking into a rolling cart. A stack of folders tumbled to the floor, spilling yellowed photos and crumbling documents everywhere. The phone dropped back into its cradle with a sharp clack. Silence. Then, a new voice spoke, not from a phone, from the air behind her. She sees now. Marla Spoon. In the far corner of the room, tucked in shadow, a figure stood. But it wasn't the paper-thin thing from the stacks. It was a woman, pale, draped in a black shroud like a funeral veil. Her arms hung limp at her sides, her feet slightly off the floor. Her eyes were sewn shut, but her mouth was open, stitched wide, not with thread, but with ink. Ink that dripped like sap from the corner of her lips. Ink that pooled on the floor, spelling words as it fell. Marla squinted. The words spelled, "I remember you, Clara." "No, Marle whispered. I'm not." But the woman's head twitched. The stitches split wider. More ink flowed. and the smell that filled the room was unmistakable. Soil, not dirt, not decay. Fresh soil newly turned, like a grave waiting for a name. Then the woman lifted her arms, and behind her, a door opened. Not on the wall, in the air. It peeled inward like torn wallpaper. Inside was darkness, pulsing like a heartbeat. Marla stepped back. The woman whispered. She left the door open too long, and something walked through. Then, without warning, the woman fell apart, collapsing like loose paper, fluttering to the floor, until all that remained was a smear of ink and a single scrap of cloth marked with an emblem. The tree, roots curled downward. And in the hallway behind her, something began to run. The sound of footsteps tore through the hallway. Too many steps, too fast, as if 100 feet were sprinting toward her in perfect unison. Not heavy enough to be a person, not light enough to be mice. It sounded wrong, like bare heels slapping wet concrete. Marla snatched up the scrap of cloth and ran. The hall behind her erupted with movement. Flickering lights, shuddering walls, the floor seeming to breathe with each footfall. As she passed the last sorting bay, something caught her eye, a photo strip fallen beside the shelves. She couldn't help herself. She snatched it up. It was a series of black and white shots, old, sun-bleached. A woman sat in each frame. Long dark hair, freckled face. Laughing in the first, smiling less in the second, neutral in the third. And in the final shot, eyes wide, mouth open in a scream that was cut off at the bottom of the frame. Scrawled on the back in ink, Clara Holden, last recorded memory. Marla's blood ran cold. Clara, the name from the box, from the journal, the name the ink-stitched woman had whispered, and her face, so familiar. It could have been Marla's sister, or a distorted version of Marla herself. She reached the end of the corridor, where a rusted elevator stood crooked in its shaft. The call button flickered red. She slammed her palm against it. Nothing. Behind her, the footfalls grew louder. Closer. The lights above exploded one by one. With no time to think, she yanked open the metal maintenance panel beside the elevator, exposing a ladder descending into black. She didn't hesitate. She climbed down. For 3 stories she descended, the cold metal rungs slick with grime. The air grew damper, the walls sweating with condensation. At the bottom, a narrow passage led away into the dark. No lighting, no signs, no indication it was ever part of the original building plans. And on the wall, scratched in faded charcoal, House Root System / Lower Vein 6. Roots. Again, like the ones in the journal. The corridor stretched forward, low and uneven. As she walked, she passed broken light fixtures filled with soil. Mushrooms with paper-thin caps bloomed from cracks in the walls. And then she heard it. A voice. Soft. Familiar. It was her own voice. Reading. The house remembers what was buried. She froze. The words were being spoken from behind a door embedded in the rock. A door without hinges, carved directly into the stone. The symbol of the tree marked the center, surrounded by dozens of fingerprints pressed deep into the surface. It opened at her touch. Inside was a small chamber. Dust and mold clung to everything. Boxes, books, cabinets. A desk sat at the center. On it, a recorder still playing. Her voice looped. The house remembers what was buried. The house remembers what was buried. Click. The recorder stopped. But then, another voice answered. And now it remembers you. From the shadows behind the desk, something rose. Not fully formed, still assembling itself. And it wore a face she recognized. Her own. The thing rose slowly, bones bending like melting wax, flesh knitting in places and tearing in others. It mimicked her down to the smallest detail. Her frizzy curls, the birthmark behind her jaw, even the tremor in her left hand. But the eyes were empty, not blank, hollow, and it smiled in a way her face was never meant to smile. Marla stumbled back against the chamber wall. Her fingers found the recorder on the desk, and, without thinking, she hit play again. Her own voice filled the room. The house remembers what was buried, and then the smile on the thing's face began split. Too wide, A black line, tearing up one cheek like a paper seam ripping open. The thing lunged. Marla dove to the side, scraping her palms on the gritty stone floor. The creature collided with the desk, sending the recorder clattering into a pile of old photographs. Each photo showed the same building from different decades. Sometimes as a house, sometimes as a courthouse, sometimes as an archive. Always changing, but always with the same tree nearby. As the creature recovered, its limbs began to stutter, jerking as if controlled by invisible strings. Its voice came out garbled, layered, broken. You opened her box, you opened yourself. From behind it, something glowed faintly, an object hanging on the back wall. A mirror. Marla scrambled toward it, not because she hoped to see her reflection, but because the glass wasn't reflecting anything at all. Not her, not the room, just darkness, depthless. She picked up a shard of broken glass near its base and turned just as the creature reached for her again. Without thinking, she drove the shard into its throat. Ink gushed from the wound, spraying the wall with a splatter of swirling script, words forming and unforming midair. The creature let out a shuddering gasp, then collapsed, folding in on itself until it was no more than a puddle of ink, spreading across the stone like oil on water. Marla knelt beside it, breath heaving. In the silence, a drip echoed from above. Then another. She looked up. A slow, steady leak was forming in the ceiling, dark fluid seeping through cracks that hadn't been there moments ago. It wasn't water. It was ink, and it was spelling, letter by letter. A single sentence. The roots are in you now. The puddle at her feet began to bubble, and from within it, a hand emerged. Not hers, Clara's, still reaching, still buried, still remembering. Clara's hand rose from the ink like it was breaking through ice, slow, trembling, drenched in viscous black. Her fingers curled, grasping blindly at the air. The skin was gray-blue, waterlogged, as though it had been submerged for years. Marla couldn't move, couldn't breathe. She should have run, but something held her. Some tether she couldn't see. Maybe it was the house. Maybe it was the box. Or maybe it was Clara. The hand clawed at the ground, and then came the arm, then the shoulder. The woman pulled herself out of the ink puddle 1 inch at a time. Her dress was rotted, eaten away in places, hanging like funeral shrouds. Her head lifted, the same stitched eyes, the same mouth sewn in ink. But unlike before, she wasn't empty. She was awake. And the moment her blind face turned toward Marla, something spoke into Marla's mind. Not aloud, never aloud, but an impression, smells, sensations. The taste of soil, the weight of stone above your chest, the feeling of being forgotten. Clara knelt, twitching, and pressed a damp hand to Marla's chest. You wore my name. Her voice echoed inside Marla's thoughts, and the house remembered. Marla whispered, I didn't know. Clara tilted her head. A broken smile touched the corners of her leaking mouth. You do now. The chamber trembled. Bookshelves split open like they were filled with roots instead of pages. Ink flowed from the walls in narrow rivulets, forming into letters that scrawled across the stone. They weren't in any language Marla knew, but somehow she could read them. Archivist, successor, vessel. Clara's body convulsed. Something was wrong. Her form warping, unraveling at the seams. As if by remembering her, the house was reclaiming her, drawing her back in. No, stop. Marla grabbed her arm, but it was like holding warm wax. Clara's features softened, melted. With her last effort, she shoved something into Marla's hands. A journal, bound in bark, wrapped in human hair. The first page bore no words, only an impression. 4 fingers pressed deep into the parchment, inked black, like an oath written in pain. And behind it, words in her own handwriting. To remember is to root. To root is to remain. Clara whispered one final thing, barely audible, almost gentle. Dig down. Then she was gone. Not violently, not instantly. She simply bled back into the stone, her form drawn into the roots, like ink absorbed into blotter paper. The door behind Marla slammed shut. The mirror cracked down the center, and the journal in her hands began to hum. She opened it. The pages flipped on their own, faster and faster, until they stopped near the center. A new entry was writing itself, dated tomorrow, her own name at the top. Beneath it, she will go where the others went. She will unearth what was buried. She will not come back alone. And on the opposite page, a drawing of herself, standing before a tree that grew through the ceiling of the archive, its branches reaching into the sky, its roots splitting the dead beneath it. And below her feet, a door, waiting. The tree in the drawing was more detailed than it had any right to be. The roots twisted like arteries beneath the floorboards, branching into tunnels that spiraled downward into the darkness. The longer Marla stared at it, the more it seemed to move, not literally, but with suggestion, like the illusion of motion at the edge of a dream. And at the base of a tree, where its roots split the ground like a wound, there was a shape etched into the dirt, a door with no handle. A door that bled. Marla closed the journal. The humming didn't stop. Instead, it grew inside her, behind her eyes, inside her teeth, buzzing in the marrow of her bones. She stumbled back into the corridor, away from the ink puddle that had once been Clara. The passage behind her was gone, walled over by tightly woven tree roots, slick with black sap. No way out, except forward. The journal grew heavier in her hands with each step, like it was absorbing something, her breath, her doubt, her hesitation. Then she found the stairwell again, but it was different now. Cracked tiles had been replaced with soft soil. The iron railing was gone, grown over with vines. And as she ascended, her footsteps no longer echoed. The air became dense, humid, almost fungal. She emerged not into the archive above, but into a chamber that hadn't been there before. It was round, circular, with walls made of books. Hundreds of them. Thousands. Some old, some new. Some bound in leather. Others in skin. All of them breathing slightly, like lungs held just beneath the surface of the page. At the center stood the tree. The tree. It burst through the floor, its bark knotted and dark, its limbs scraping the circular ceiling, which was made entirely of mirrors reflecting the tree back at itself, endlessly. Marla approached, and then she saw it. The door, nestled among the roots, low to the ground, half covered in black leaves and dirt. She knelt and brushed the debris aside. No, look. But when she placed her hand on it, she felt heat. And beneath her palm, the wood began to breathe. Then a voice. Clara's again, far away this time, like an echo whispered through dirt. You'll find them all there. The lost ones, the buried ones, the others who remembered too much. Marla gritted her teeth. She had come this far. She had opened the box, touched the roots, seen herself in things that were never supposed to reflect. The house wanted her to open it, but this time, she wasn't just following instructions. She was digging back. She pressed both hands to the door and whispered. I remember. It opened, slowly, grudgingly, and the air that came out was cold, wet, thick with spores and ink and the faint scent of lilac and blood. She stepped through, and the door closed behind her without a sound. The tunnel beyond the root door was impossibly long. It sloped downward, carved not by hands but by something older, the earth shaped into narrow ribs like the inside of a great beast. The walls pulsed slightly with warmth, damp with condensation. Fungal growths lined the path, glowing dimly with a bioluminescent shimmer. Their spores hung in the air like dust motes suspended in water. Marla pressed forward, clutching the journal tightly. The pages rustled even when she wasn't moving them, as if they were reading themselves. Each step took her further from the rules of the waking world. Her thoughts slowed, stretched. Memories surfaced unbidden, of her mother's voice humming softly while folding laundry, of her childhood bedroom, of the first time she ever saw the archive's door and felt the odd pull it had on her. The hallway forked ahead, two tunnels branching off in opposite directions. At the split, a figure stood. It was a woman in a faded archivist uniform, soaked through with rot and time. Her back was to Marla, her head tilted slightly, unnaturally to one side. Marla took a cautious step forward. The woman didn't move. Then, without turning, she spoke. "He took my tongue, so I wouldn't tell." Marla froze. Her voice was barely a whisper. "Who?" The woman slowly raised one trembling hand and pointed toward the right-hand tunnel. "The scribe. The first archivist. He writes in roots, buries knowledge in flesh. I was the eighth." She turned now, and Marla gasped. Her mouth was sewn shut with what looked like threads of hair. Her eyes bled ink. From her chest hung a wooden tag, etched with deep scratch marks. "Eight." Marla took a step back, but the woman didn't approach. She simply faded like dust scattering in windless air until she was gone. The journal in Marla's hand flipped to a new page. A map, 2 tunnels, a mark scratched on the right side. A symbol resembling an eye with roots branching from it. Underneath it, in ink still wet, the others went this way. Marla wiped sweat from her brow and stepped into the right-hand tunnel. Immediately, the walls closed in tighter and the glow dimmed. She was walking through memory, through forgotten chapters of people the house had taken. And then she saw them. Dozens of alcoves carved into the walls, each holding a small shrine. Photos, trinkets, bones, some labeled in handwritten notes, others bearing only a number. 2, 4, 11. All archivists, all lost, all remembered by the house. At the 12th alcove, she stopped cold. The picture was of her, but not her now. Her later, eyes empty, skin pale, tree roots bursting from her mouth like vines through broken stone. And underneath her photo, a card. 12. The journal in her hand burned against her palm, and something deeper down the tunnel began to stir. Not walking, writing, pen scratching in a bark. And a voice, deep and echoing through the roots like thunder in the marrow. Number 12 approaches. The air grew denser the further she went, thick like old syrup, tasting of mildew and blood. Marla's breath came in ragged gasps, and every step echoed like a drumbeat through her skull. The tunnel sloped deeper now, narrowing with each twist until she was forced to duck under low-hanging roots that pulsed faintly with a heartbeat of their own. The journal grew heavier still. Then silence. Too complete. The tunnel opened into a wide chamber. It was cavernous, the ceiling lost in darkness, the walls slick with moisture. Roots hung like chandeliers, dripping black sap onto a floor made entirely of pages, a mosaic of torn books, diaries, letters, and fragments of parchment written in hundreds of hands. At the center of it all sat the scribe. He was hunched, long-limbed, his back knotted with veins of ink and bark. What might once have been a man was now something written through. His arms were impossibly long, fingers ink-stained and broken, scratching endlessly into the trunk of a massive, living tree that grew from the middle of the chamber. The bark bore carvings, thousands of them, etched names, dates, and memories written in languages no human tongue could pronounce. He did not look up as Marla stepped inside, only wrote, over and over, with a stylus made of bone. But she could feel his mind acknowledge her, like static flooding her skull. Then the tree moaned, not from wind, from memory. He remembered screams, names, moments of loss. He remembered Clara, and Marla, and the voice of the house that wept. 12, the scribe said, his voice grinding like stone against teeth. The last of them. Marla held up the journal. "You've been writing me since the beginning." His fingers stopped mid-stroke. Then very slowly he turned. His eyes were gone, black pits weeping ink down his hollow cheeks. But he saw her all the same. "I only write what the house tells me," he rasped. "And the house remembers everything." He pointed toward the base of a tree. There, bound to the roots, were the bodies of those who came before her, each one partially open, like books with skin for covers. Chests splayed wide, ribs parted, their hearts gone, replaced with wooden pages nailed into flesh. Archivists, all of them, still breathing, still twitching, still remembering. "You took Clara's burden," the scribe said. "Now you must finish a record." "No." Marla stepped forward. "I'm not your vessel." She opened the journal and turned to the final blank page, and spoke a single word into it. "Forget." The word burned. Smoke rose from the page. The roots recoiled. The scribe let out a scream, a howl of agony as the ink began to run backwards, away from his hands, from the tree, from the bodies. The chamber groaned. The walls cracked. And from every carved page on the floor, the words bled away. Marla didn't wait. She ran. Past the scribe, writhing in the ink flood, past the tree shedding bark like scabs, past the dying moans of the once archivist finally being unwritten. Back into the tunnel. The house screamed. But this time it wasn't grief. It was rage. And the journal in her hands whispered, "You can run, but you carry the root. And one day it will bloom." Marla didn't stop running until her knees gave out. The tunnel twisted in impossible directions now, spiraling inward like a whirlpool of dirt and ink. The roots above her clawed the ceiling like fingers trying to dig their way back up. Behind her, the scribe's chamber collapsed in on itself with a sound like wet thunder, as if the house was devouring its own heart. She pressed her back against the wall, clutching the journal. It was quiet now, too quiet. Even the house was holding its breath. She opened the journal again, her fingers trembling. The final pages were still smoking, blackened at the edges, the ink half erased but not fully gone. One word kept reappearing no matter how many times she blinked. Bloom. At first it meant nothing. Then she felt it. A twitch beneath her skin. A heat blooming in her chest. Not pain, but pressure. Like something buried deep had started to move. She pulled up her sleeve. Her veins were darkening. No, not veins. Roots. Tiny black threads spreading beneath her skin, curling around her bones. The more she stared, the more they grew, like vines thirsting for light. "No," she whispered. "I broke the chain. I didn't finish the story." The journal flipped on its own. A new page wrote itself. There is no end, only propagation. She became the seed. Marla screamed and flung the book down the tunnel. It slapped against the wall and landed in the dirt, but didn't stop writing. Words poured across the open page like a flood. She ran from the tree, but the tree followed. She tried to forget, but the house remembered. She burned the roots, but now she blooms. Suddenly, a sound behind her. Footsteps, but not of one person. Many. Schulft, Vet, Schiffling. She turned. Figures were approaching. Clara, the other archivists, all 12, now fully visible, walking with empty eyes and open chests, the pages within them fluttering as if blown by unseen wind. They did not speak, but the house did. Every archivist becomes a chapter. Every chapter needs a reader. And Marla knew, then, with a sickening certainty, she wasn't meant to replace Clara. She was meant to be the next page. She ran, this time not into the tunnels, but upward. The roots split open for her, either in obedience or anticipation. Her fingers tore on the walls, nails ripped down to raw beds, breath hitching as the vines within her chest pulsed harder, faster. She burst through a hatch and found herself back in the archive. Except it was no longer as she remembered it. The walls bled ink. The books whispered. The air shimmered like heat rising off a corpse. In the center stood the tree. But taller now, its limbs scraping the ceiling. Beneath it, the journal lay open on a pedestal of bone. Waiting, Marla stumbled forward, heart pounding, eyes burning. She had one page left. Only one. And the roots inside her were blooming fast now. Curling up her throat, pressing behind her eyes, threading through her spine. She picked up the journal and wrote, "I'm the last archivist. This house remembers. But I do not want to." The tree shuddered. The ink froze. For one brief moment, the house paused, as if unsure. And in that space, that hesitation, Marla made her final decision. She tore the last page out and ate it. The words passed her lips like fire, and the house screamed. The scream of memory denied, of stories unraveled, of the final page refused. And then, darkness, and silence, and something like peace. For now, she awoke lying on stone. No ink, no tree, just the quiet ticking of a clock somewhere far above. Marla sat up slowly, her throat raw, her limbs trembling. The roots beneath her skin had withered, brown and dry, flaking off like ash. The bloom had died before it fully took hold. She had starved the house, denied its ending, but had taken something from her in return. She couldn't remember her name, or how she had arrived. Only fragments floated in her mind. Pages torn from books she had once held, now drifting in darkness. A whisper slithered down the hall. You left the door open. She turned sharply. The archive hallway stretched out in both directions, empty. Dust hung in the air like mist. The books on the shelves were old, too old, and many had no titles. Just smooth, blank spines that trembled when her eyes lingered too long. She rose to her feet and followed the whisper. It led her past the reading desk, past the globe of the world that spun endlessly even with no wind, past the old phonograph that played no song, yet vibrated faintly with a memory she couldn't place. The further she walked, the more she noticed the changes. Small ones at first, the shape of the light, the way the corners curved, the absence of her own reflection in the glass cabinet doors. Then she saw it again, the door at the far end of the hall. Not the original root door, but its shadow, wooden tall, cracked down the middle like a healing wound. The brass handle glinted in the light of the single overhead bulb that buzzed with sickly yellow glow. A sign hung from the handle. Return what was taken, and on the floor before it, another journal. Not hers. New, untouched, but when she opened it, it knew her. Archivist 12, Marla Greaves. Memory rejected. Bloom withheld. Status, unresolved. Her knees buckled. This wasn't over. She hadn't escaped. She had only delayed it. Because even now, the journal wrote beneath her hands. The story reroutes. It must be completed. She must remember what she chose to forget. She looked up as the door creaked open on its own. And on the other side, beyond the threshold, was the first page. A younger her, sitting at a desk, opening a file labeled, "The House That Wept." The story was starting again. The house didn't need time to pass. It only needed a mind to loop. And now, Marla understood her role not as the last archivist, but as the binding. She could try to run again, or forget again, but the book would always open to her. The house would always weep. And so she sat down, opened the journal, and wrote. Once there was a house, and it remembered everything. And the door shut. Part 2. The knock came at 2:13 a.m. Elijah North had been asleep in the curator's loft above the Montgrave Historical Institute. What was left of the Old City Museum after funding cuts and fire damage had reduced it to a husk of forgotten exhibits. He kept odd hours anyway, cataloging fragments of regional history no one cared to remember. But this knock was different. 3 sharp raps, spaced perfectly, like the rhythm of a heartbeat. He descended the creaking stairs barefoot, bathed in the flickering green light of the emergency exit signs. No storm, no wind, just an overwhelming stillness, as if something else were holding its breath. He unlocked the door. No one stood there, only a package, wrapped in brown cloth, tied with twine, damp like it had been sitting somewhere underground. The paper smelled like mold and copper. No return address, just his name, written in red ink. Elijah North, curator. He hesitated, then brought it inside, under the desk lamp. He untied the twine and peeled back the cloth. Inside was a book, not modern, bound in what appeared to be old hide, etched with curling black veins like roots trapped in amber. Across the front, embossed in faded gold leaf, a title. The House That Wept, red ledger. His mouth went dry. He had never seen the volume before, but it felt familiar, like a word he couldn't quite recall. He flipped open the cover. The first page read, "For the next a record, the last a memory. This is not your first time reading." The lights flickered. Something shifted behind him, a creak in the floorboards where no one stood. Elijah's hands trembled as he turned to the next page, and gasped. It was a photograph of him, sitting exactly as he was now, opening this very book. Behind him, barely visible in the shadows of the museum shelves, stood a woman with empty eyes and dark veins crawling up her throat. He slammed the book shut and heard a whisper behind his ear. Archivist 12, unbound. He spun, but the shadows had rearranged themselves, and the book was still open, still writing, still bleeding new ink onto its own pages. He had never been part of the archive, But now, he had been added. Elijah didn't sleep the rest of that night. He placed the ledger beneath an antique bell jar, more out of superstition than reason. But no matter where he put it, in the cabinet, the safe, even briefly inside the specimen freezer, it reappeared within arm's reach before long. Always open to the same page. You're not reading it. It is reading you. At dawn, he called Dr. Lizette Yarrow, the only occult historian left on the Institute's volunteer advisory board. She specialized in unrecorded texts, a polite way of saying things no one wanted written down in the first place. She arrived in less than an hour, her clothes inside out, her eyes bloodshot. When Elijah showed her the ledger, she froze. Her hands didn't move. Her lips barely parted. Only her breath betrayed her. Shallow, fast, like a trapped bird. "Where did you get this?" she whispered. "I didn't," Elijah replied. "It came to me." Lizette knelt beside the pedestal where the book now sat. She didn't touch it, only watched. After a long silence, she said, "There were rumors of a 13th manuscript." Elijah frowned. 13 what? "Ledgers," she said. "Not books. Ledgers. Each one tied to an archivist, custodians of memory, of trauma. Usually, they vanish with the holder, or the holder vanishes with them. This one shouldn't exist." She finally reached out and flipped a page. A new entry had appeared since Elijah last looked. Entry 247, Elijah North. Position, Curator. Role, Archivist 13. Induction, complete. The overhead lights popped. One by one, shards of glass hit the tile floor like falling teeth. "Stop reading it," Lizette said, her voice sharp. "I didn't read that," Elijah murmured. "I never touched it." They both looked back at the page. Another line had been added. They always say that at first. Then, the bell jar shattered. Ink poured from the pages like smoke, curling into tendrils, coiling down the pedestal and across the floor. Where it touched the museum tile, history rewrote itself. Plaques shifted their dates, photos darkened, names rearranged. The entire archive groaned like a thing waking from long sleep. Lizette backed away, but Elijah couldn't move. His feet were rooted, and from beneath the floor, he heard it, a sound like a woman crying, from the foundations, from the house, and the ledger whispered in its rustling voice. "The tree remembers. The root persists. Archivist 12 unbound. Archivist 13 shall restore." The museum doors slammed shut behind them, and Elijah knew this wasn't about recording the past. It was about restoring what the house wanted remembered, even if it was never meant to be known again. That night, the museum rearranged itself. Elijah and Lizette stayed in the main hall, barricading themselves with toppled display cases and cracked marble busts. The lights were unreliable, flickering like candles in a windless room. Shadows stretched longer than they should. Footsteps echoed from the wings, even when they were alone. The red ledger sat at the center of the room on its pedestal, no longer bleeding ink, but breathing. Not literally, but its pages pulsed gently, like lungs beneath skin. Lizette stood by the old floor map of the building, cross-referencing it with the journal she kept in her satchel. "There used to be a sub-level," she muttered. "Vault B, record storage, sealed after the fire in 1989. "I've worked here 12 years, Elijah said. "There's no Vault B." "There is," she replied without looking up. "You just haven't seen it yet. The house doesn't show its doors all at once." Elijah moved to the corner where the ledger's ink had first spilled into the tiles. Now the floor was splitting subtly. The grout lines were wider, bleeding darkness. Between them, root-like filaments squirmed deeper into the stone. Some of them were growing backward, as if time itself was being unwound. The red ledger's latest page began to turn. Words appeared as Lizette approached. Entry 248, Vault be located. Sealed under false fire report. Contents, transcripts, failed blooms. Subject, 12. 12. Elijah repeated. "Marla." Lizette didn't answer. Instead, she knelt beside the warping floor and pulled out a small wooden key. No markings, no teeth, just a smooth shape worn down by time. It came with my first research grant, she said quietly. I never knew what it opened. Until now. The floor cracked, then shifted. A square slab of tile recessed inward, revealing a dark shaft and a rusted ladder disappearing into the earth. The air that rose up wasn't musty. It was wet, like breathing in drowned paper and old tears. Lizette looked at Elijah, her face pale but resolute. We're going down. Elijah stared at the red ledger. Its newest entry glistened wetly. Vault access granted. Memory unlocked. Descend to remember. And below, in the root dark pit where no light reached, came the soft sound of pages turning. Not one book, dozens, and some of them still screamed. The descent was deeper than the museum's foundation had any right to allow. The ladder groaned beneath their weight, every rung slick with condensation. Stone walls gave way to clay, then to something darker, fibrous, almost fleshy. It pulsed faintly in the dark, veins webbing outward with ink-black liquid seeping between the seams. Elijah's flashlight sputtered twice before stabilizing. Lizette was already 2 rungs below him, her fingers tight around the rails. We're passing the temporal barrier, she said, voice hollow against the shaft walls. What does that mean? Elijah whispered. She looked up at him. It means we've left the museum. At last, the shaft opened into a chamber. Vault B, a room made entirely of stone and inked timber, like a catacomb carved by forgotten hands. Shelves stretched to the ceiling, stuffed not with books, but with ledgers. Hundreds of them, identical to the red ledger, bound in root vein hide, all of them breathing slowly. Each was chained shut with twisted brass loops and tags labeled only by number and name. Archivist 1, James Merrill. Archivist 2, Ilya Finch. Archivist 3, Devin Arlen. Elijah's eyes swept the rows until he found Archivist 12, Marla Greaves. Her ledger was unchained, its cover peeled back slightly, like a wound ready to open. Lizette reached out, but it flipped itself open before she could touch it. Ink poured from the pages, coalescing into a figure that hovered above the floor. A silhouette of Marla, flickering like a projection, eyes wide, veins black, her mouth stuck open in a silent scream. And then a voice, not hers, echoed through the chamber. 12 defied the end. Her refusal fractured the cycle. 13 must restore the bloom. Elijah stepped back as Marla's shadow reached for him. Her fingers extended like ink tendrils, seeking his chest, his throat, his eyes. But she stopped short and whispered, not to him, but to Lizette. You knew. You were next. You passed the key. Lizette paled. No, I catalog. I didn't. You remembered too well, Marla's shade said. You touched the root. The chamber trembled. Chains snapped, loose across the shelves. Other ledgers began to stir. All at once, the vault began to awaken. Pages flipped. Ink surged. The books weren't merely records. They were trapped archivists, and one by one, their memories began to bleed into the air like thick, cloying fog. Elijah pulled Lizette toward the exit tunnel, but the ladder had vanished. The shaft had collapsed, and the walls began to whisper. You have entered the binding. You will not leave until the story is told. The red ledger opened in Elijah's hands. A blank page awaited. The quill rose from its ink well beside Marla's ledger, waiting, demanding, and Elijah understood. He had to write his way out, or become entry 249. The quill hovered in the air like a blade poised to cut. Elijah's hands trembled as it dropped into his open palm, light as a feather but cold as bone. Lizette stood behind him, her back to the shelves as the fog thickened, pressing down with the weight of forgotten truths. Whispers bled from the ledgers like smoke through cracks in the earth. Whispers in Latin, Old Norse, languages older than tongues. But some whispered his name. Elijah, archivist. Remember, the red ledger opened itself before him on a blackwood lectern. Its parchment rippled despite the still air, and at the top of the blank page, fresh red ink bloomed in words not written by his hand. Entry 249, initiate. Draft unstarted. Exit denied. Lizette grabbed his shoulder. You don't have to write it. There has to be another way. Elijah looked at her, really looked, and saw that her veins were beginning to darken, spider webbing beneath her skin, just like Marla's. You're changing, he said softly. She nodded, biting her lip hard enough to draw blood. I've been down here before. Not fully, but I dreamed of it. The ink stains from my work. They never washed off. Because they weren't ink, he whispered. From the shelves, a loud snap echoed, like a neck breaking. One of the ledgers burst open and screamed, a wailing sound that curdled the blood. Wind stirred through the vault, carrying the screams like a choir of drowned archivists. The quill twisted in his hand, and Elijah began to write. At first, it was nonsense. Scratches, words that weren't his. But slowly, they began to take shape. His memories poured out, first of the museum, then of the knock on his door, the red ledger, Lizette, Vault B, and then deeper. Things he'd never remembered remembering. A house on fire, a child crying under floorboards, a mother with ink pouring from her eyes. Lizette sobbed behind him. Elijah, she whispered, you're writing my memories. He stopped, but the quill did not. It moved of its own accord now, dragging across the page with wet, slithering strokes. Archivist 12 rejected the bloom. Archivist 13 consumes the root. Elijah tried to let go, but his hand was no longer his. The ink was inside him, threading through his veins, and the red ledger pulsed beneath his wrist like a second heartbeat. The room grew brighter. No, really. A glowing crimson light rose from the seams in the floor, the ledgers, the very walls. Shapes began to move in it. Figures half-formed, eyes where mouths should be, memories that had never been human. One by one, they turned toward him, watching, expectant. Finish the story, they whispered in unison. Let the root bloom again. And behind them, a massive door formed from pages, bones, and blackwood. A way out, maybe, or a deeper way in. But Elijah had no choice. The ink would not let him stop. The door of pages and bone loomed ahead, tall as a cathedral arch. Every surface of it was inscribed, scratched, stained, etched with names. Thousands of them. Some were crossed out, some burned at the edges, others rewritten in different hands. One near the center pulsed faintly. Elijah North, and below it, a second name slowly revealed itself. Lizette Yarrow. Lizette stared at it in horror. No, that's not my page. I never accepted the ledger. I only studied, but the name carved itself deeper, the letters smoking, embedding into the living material of the door. The smell was unbearable. Charred parchment, ink turned to ash. I think, Elijah said slowly, it doesn't care what we accept. He stepped forward, the red ledger still open in his hands. It had ceased writing on its own, as if waiting to see what he'd do next. But the quill hung in the air beside him, twitching slightly, like a predator's tongue tasting the air. The door's center split with a low, wet peal. Not a creak or groan. It opened like flesh being parted. And beyond it, light. But not warm. Not inviting. A sickly amber glow lit a long hallway of wooden beams and damp soil, held up by tangled roots that moved ever so slightly, as though still growing. It looked like a place beneath time. A place older than architecture. And from within the tunnel came the voice again. Archivist 13, your root is ready. Water it with memory. Lizette reached for Elijah's hand, but recoiled the moment their skin met. His fingertips were black with ink now, and the pigment crawled up his wrist like ivy. I can't go in, she whispered. It's already feeding on you. If I go, it'll finish what it started in me. I'll become like her. Elijah, she said firmly. Marla's not the only one who refused. There were others. They just didn't live long enough to be recorded. He turned to her. You knew all this time, didn't you? She nodded, shame clouding her expression. I tried to stop the ledger from finding another host. That's what the key was for, to keep it buried. It didn't work, he said. No, she admitted. It never does. From behind the pages, a sound rose, wet, heavy footsteps echoing from somewhere deeper within the vault. Not walking, approaching. The figures in the fog turned their heads sharply. The ledgers snapped shut all at once. Even the quill dropped, lifeless. The red ledger slammed closed, nearly crushing Elijah's hand. And then, something stepped through the open doorway. Something that wore the face of Elijah's mother, except her eyes were hollow, leaking red ink, and her skin was stitched together from pages. The house had sent a keeper, and it was time for the archivist to choose. It stood at the threshold, draped in torn parchment like robes, bound in inked sinew and thread. The face was impossibly close to that of Elijah's mother. Her gentle cheekbones, her graying curls, even the scar above her lip. But her eyes, they were wrong. Deep voids, rivers of pulsing red ink flowed from them, leaving streaks across her jaw and neck like veins made visible. Elijah, it said with her voice. Not like her voice, her actual voice, but it was a memory, his memory, weaponized, twisted, resurrected by the ledger. Lizette fell back, knocking over a ledger stand as the vault shuddered. Elijah, don't listen, don't engage. That's not her. It's the keeper. It wants you to surrender. Once you do, the keeper stepped forward, barefoot on the stone, ink soaking into each footprint. Her mouth opened, and when she spoke again, her voice overlapped with others, echoes of Marla, of the archivist long dead, and something deeper still. 13 must be bound. The bloom must be fed. All memory must be housed. Elijah backed toward the ledger gate, feeling its pages flutter against his back like wings ready to enfold or devour. I don't want this, he said, but the keeper only tilted her head. Neither did 1, or 5, or 12. You all chose curiosity. Curiosity opens the door. We only invite you to finish what you begin. She reached out. Her hands were raw parchment. Her fingers were stitched quills. Lizette moved to block her, arms spread. You'll take him over my dead body. The keeper paused and said, gently, as you wish. Before Elijah could scream, before Lizette could even cry out, the keeper's body unraveled. Pages unfurled like wings, shredded, screaming wings, and swept Lizette off her feet, hurling her into the vault wall with sickening force. She hit the stone hard and crumpled. Lizette, but she didn't answer. The keeper reformed, turning back to Elijah with ink dripping from her outstretched arms. You will forget her in time, she whispered. The red ledger opened again on a new page. And there, in trembling ink already half written, entry 249, acceptance imminent. Memory of Lizette. Fading, Elijah clenched his fists. The ink had reached his elbows now, threading his veins like black roots. He stepped forward. The keeper smiled, but instead of kneeling, Elijah raised the red ledger and threw it into the keeper's chest. The book struck with a sound like thunder and splintering bones. The keeper shrieked, pages tearing from her body in violent bursts. Light, raw, flickering light, erupted from her mouth and eyes as the ledger caught fire in her arms. Elijah ran to Lizette's side. Blood streaked her temple, and her breathing was shallow, but her eyes opened. You didn't write it, she murmured. No, he said, helping her up, but I think it just did. Behind them, the keeper collapsed into a pile of ash and torn bindings. The red ledger lay in the center, still burning, but not turning to ash, turning to seed. A bulb of pulsing red root sat where the book had been, the bloom, and it was waiting for someone to plant it. The seed pulsed with a heartbeat that wasn't Elijah's, but every throb sent a ripple through his chest as though it had latched onto his rhythm. Small red tendrils twitched along its surface, roots seeking soil or blood. Lizette leaned heavily against the wall. Her breathing had steadied, but the wound at her temple still bled. She stared at the seed, her voice barely above a whisper. That's it, the original memory. The root they've been planting in every archivist. Elijah crouched beside it, hesitant to touch. What happens if it's planted? I don't know, she said. Every version I've seen ends before that point. Some burned it. Some tried to destroy the vault. But none ever completed the cycle. The ledger gate remained open, its living pages flapping slowly as if in windless air. The hallway beyond still glowed with sickly amber light. Behind them, the shelves of Vault B began to crack. The ledgers moaned in unison, low, drawn-out sounds, like breath being taken in preparation for screaming. "We're out of time," Elijah said. Lizette stumbled forward, her eyes fixed on the seed. "You can't plant it. That's how they bind you. That's how they start the next ledger. But if I don't, it doesn't end either." He reached down. The moment his fingers brushed the surface of the seed, everything stopped. The vault froze. Time stilled. Even the fog paused mid-sway, suspended like smoke beneath glass. And suddenly, he was elsewhere, standing in the museum. Not the broken one, but the original. Polished floors, intact windows, no bleeding paintings or groaning walls. He turned and saw himself, younger, perhaps 16, standing beside his mother. They were in the West Wing. She was smiling, pointing to a sculpture. Her hands were clean, her eyes bright. There was no ink. "Elijah," she said, "you always remember things no one else notices. You make a good archivist one day." "I don't want to keep dusty old records," the young Elijah said. "I want to make something new." His mother smiled. "You don't archive the past, sweetheart. You plant it." The scene blurred, dissolved. He was back in a vault, hands still on the seed. Lizette looked up at him. "What did you see?" "My mother," he said slowly. "Before all of this. Before the ledger." Lizette knelt beside him. "You've touched the root. That memory wasn't just yours. It was hers too. Probably all of theirs. She planted it in me," he said. Lizette hesitated. "Then maybe it's not about growing the ledger again. Maybe you can change what blooms." Elijah stood, holding the seed in both hands. It was warm now and quiet. He turned toward the hallway, the passage beyond the gate, and he began to walk. The walls pulsed gently as he passed. A faint hum filled the air. It wasn't ink or blood or madness. It was possibility. The deeper he went, the more the seed glowed, until at the end of the hall, a shallow basin carved of ancient stone waited in the earth, and beside it, etched into the floor, "Plant the memory. Let it grow true." Elijah looked back. Lizette was just behind him. Together, they stepped into the bloom chamber, and he placed the seed into the earth. The moment the seed touched soil, the entire chamber trembled. Thin vines of red root burst from the basin, slithering outward like fingers spreading through forgotten veins. The bloom's light intensified, no longer amber, but white, blinding and pure. Elijah and Lizette shielded their eyes as the roots snaked up the walls, embedding into the flesh stone, igniting glyphs long buried in dust and ink. A deep rumble echoed from the foundations of the vault. Lizette clutched Elijah's arm. "It's rewriting the structure. The house is changing." The bloom pulsed a final time, and then silence. When their vision cleared, the chamber was no longer a tomb. It had become a garden. Paper-thin leaves rustled overhead on trees made of stitched bindings. Fruit hung from branches, small spheres filled with swirling memories. Whispers floated gently through the air, no longer tortured, but reverent. Elijah approached one of the trees. Its bark bore names, archivists past and present, but now, instead of screaming, the names sang. He turned to Lizette. "We did it. We changed the seed." But before she could respond, a figure emerged from the far end of the garden path. Not the keeper, not the house. Someone older, a man with eyes like closed books and skin creased like parchment. He wore a robe of roots and light. "Elijah North," the man said. His voice was ancient, layered with hundreds of tones. "You have broken the pattern." Lizette stepped forward, wary. "Who are you?" "I'm a first archivist," he said. "The one who planted the original root. The one who first betrayed the memory." Elijah froze. "Then it was you. You made this thing, this cycle." The first archivist bowed his head. "I did. In a time of loss and fear. I sought to preserve memory and became its prisoner." He looked up, smiling faintly. "But you planted something new. Not remembrance through pain, but through choice." Lizette stepped beside Elijah, voice firm. "Then it's over?" The first archivist hesitated. "No," he said, "it is not over, but it can finally end." The garden trembled again, and deep below them, something old began to wake. The ground beneath the balloon chamber trembled like a living creature shifting in its sleep. The first archivist turned his face toward the soil, sorrow flickering across his eyes. The root core, he said, it sleeps in the foundation of the house. It fed on generations of archivists, on fear, on memory warped into pain. Now that the pattern is broken, it's waking up. Lizette drew closer to Elijah. If it wakes fully, it won't let go quietly, the first archivist finished. It was never just a book or a vault or a house. It was a will, a hunger, bound to me, born from my first betrayal. A fissure opened across the garden's floor. Light bled upward, but not the holy kind from the bloom. This was hungry, flickering red like the old ink, churning with ash and whispers. From the crack came a voice. Elijah, come back. We were never done. Elijah staggered back as the ground split wider. Tendrils of black parchment clawed their way up from the crevice, dragging something with them. A shape, half human, half-bound ledger, stitched together from screams and memories. It wore Elijah's face, but older and broken. What the hell is that? Lizette cried. The first archivist lowered his head. It is what you would have become had you accepted the ledger's full burden. A possible future, birthed from the old root's last breath. The doppelganger opened its mouth. Ink poured from it. You left us behind. You were meant to remember everything. Forever. That was the bargain. Elijah stepped forward, his fists clenched. No, that was your bargain. I never agreed to be swallowed by the past. The shade snarled, splitting open from sternum to throat, revealing pages where flesh should be. On every page was a version of Elijah, dying, kneeling, screaming. Lizette gripped his arm. You can't fight it. Not like this. But Elijah shook his head. I don't have to fight it. I just have to release it. He turned back to the blooming garden, to the tree bearing archivist names. One fruit, glowing, faint, hung low. He reached for it, and when he touched it, he whispered. I released the memory. The fruit burst in his hand. Light raced across the vines, down the roots, into the fissure, and burned the doppelganger in silence. The creature didn't scream. It simply dissolved, page by page, until nothing remained but ink turning to dust. The crevice sealed. The garden stilled. The first archivist wept. Thank you, he whispered. You've done what I could not. But Elijah wasn't finished yet. There's still archives out there, he said. Other houses. Other roots. Lizette nodded. Then we go to them. The first archivist stepped aside, revealing a door behind a curtain of vines. Away from this house lies the next record. If you go now, you may still reach the others. Elijah looked at Lizette. She nodded. They stepped through together. The house behind them did not scream. It sighed. The door did not open to another corridor, or chamber, or vault. It opened to nothing. A wide, endless gray expanse stretched in all directions. The ground beneath Elijah and Lizette's feet felt neither solid nor soft. It simply was. The air buzzed with the faint sound of turning pages, as though the very fabric of this place was built from forgotten chapters. Lizette squinted into the void. Where are we? The interval came the first archivist's voice, though he remained behind the door. A space between archive houses, between roots. Few ever passed through it. Elijah stepped cautiously forward. Why bring us here? Because you're not just escaping the house. You're becoming something else. To reach the other archives, you must cross this place, unchained by the past, unburdened by memory. The door shut behind them. For a moment, silence reigned. Then Lizette spoke, softer. Do you think this is what it feels like to forget? Elijah glanced at her. I don't think we're meant to forget. I think we're meant to choose what we carry. Shapes began to emerge in the distance. Distant outlines of other houses. Not identical to the one they left, but similar in spirit. Some appeared to be nothing more than cottages. Others resembled towering libraries built sideways, or spiraling cathedrals stitched with torn pages. They were scattered across the gray like islands adrift in a still sea. Each one wept, quietly, longingly. Lizette pointed toward one shaped like a sunken dome. That one. Do you feel it? Elijah nodded. Pain, Not rage, not hunger, loss. They walked, each step dissolving the gray beneath their feet and replacing it with moss, stone, memories, the beginnings of a path. As they approached the domed archive, a voice drifted from within. Feminine, warm, familiar. Elijah, his breath caught. Mom. Lizette turned sharply. That's not. But Elijah raised a hand. I know it's not really her, but something inside there has her voice. Her memory. They reached the threshold of the archive. Its door was sealed with wax. Old wax, faded and cracked. A sigil was carved into it. The weeping eye, the same symbol from the red ledger, now upside down. Lizette pressed her fingers to the seal. This place hasn't been opened in a long time. Maybe even centuries. Elijah stared at the symbol. But someone left this for me. I think it's a warning. He placed his hand on the seal. It pulsed once, then melted away. The door creaked open, and the scent of old paper and salt water rushed out. Together, they stepped inside. The dome's interior was not a vault. It was a shoreline. Beyond the entrance stretched a vast underground ocean, black and glistening, its surface rippling with the slow pulse of memories just beneath. Rising from the water were shelves, thousands of them, jutting like grave markers from the shallows. Each one held a single book, bound in pale skin, their titles etched in languages neither Elijah nor Lizette could read. The ceiling above was a pale, cloudy glass, filtering in shifting light. A soft drizzle fell from it, as if the archive itself was weeping from above. Lizette turned in a slow circle. This isn't like the others. It's not just a memory vault. It's a graveyard. Elijah took a hesitant step forward. The water was ankle deep, but ice cold, and it didn't ripple around him, just parted as if recognizing him. He moved toward one of the closest shelves. The book it held bore no name, just a mark. A weeping eye, identical to the seal on the door. He opened it. Instead of ink, the pages were made of fog. The moment he touched one, he saw flashes. A woman screaming on a burning staircase. A child holding a red feather in a blizzard. An archivist in white robes stepping into a furnace, carrying a seed in his mouth. Elijah snapped the book shut. They're not just memories. They're sacrifices. Lizette joined him, her voice hollow. This is where they bury the archivists who never escaped. The ones who gave everything to the ledger and lost themselves. She pointed to a distant shelf. Its book was still open, glowing faintly. Elijah stared. He didn't know how he recognized it, but he did. My mother's, he whispered. He rushed forward, water lapping higher as he neared the glowing shelf. The book pulsed like a heartbeat. Pages flipped open without wind. Inside, her life was laid bare. First memories, her induction into the house, the slow unraveling of self. And at the end, she chose to bind herself into the archive so Elijah could be born free. A final page fluttered forward. His name, written in gold thread. Elijah, Lizette said behind him, her voice tight. Someone else is here. From the far end of the flooded library, a shape emerged. It wore no robes, bore no eyes. Its face was a smooth mask carved from bone, mouthless, voiceless, but watched with something deeper. In its hand, a quill, dipped in blood, the final scribe, the one who wrote endings. It began walking toward them. Elijah stepped between Lizette and the figure, eyes hard. I'm not afraid of endings anymore, he said, but I won't let you write mine. The scribe raised the quill. The water began to boil, and the final ledger began to write itself into the sea. The boiling sea rose in spirals, steam hissing around them as the final scribe advanced, its footsteps silent, each one leaving runes in the water that glowed briefly before fading. The shelves behind it crumbled to ash, their books erased, names unspoken. The dome itself began to shake. Lizette clutched Elijah's arm. It's writing a total erasure. Not just this place. Us. Our line. Everything. Elijah's breath came in ragged bursts. It wants to undo the root completely. Burn the garden. Sever the bloom. The scribe raised its quill higher. Threads of red reached from the water, linking it to the book bearing Elijah's mother's name. The pages began to unravel. No, Elijah cried, rushing forward. You don't get to write my story. He reached the shelf, but the book's cover snapped shut as if by some unseen command. The water surged upward, dragging him to his knees. Lizette screamed his name, and then she did something he hadn't expected. She ran toward the final scribe, pulled a blade of memory, a jagged shard of broken glyph glass, from her belt and hurled it at the creature. The glass struck its mask and cracked it. The scribe paused, only for a second, but it was enough. Elijah reached within his coat, where he had tucked away the bloom's fruit fragment, the one that had burst in the garden. It was only a sliver now, dim but still alive. He pressed it to the book. Not an ending, he whispered. A rebirth. The fragment sank into the binding, and everything stopped. The water dropped instantly. The boiling ceased. The final scribe staggered back, clutching its chest. Its mask splintered down the middle, revealing not a face, but an empty void, swirling with half-written memories. The bloom fragment flared once, bright as a sun, and then dissolved into every book in the dome. The titles rewrote themselves. Names returned. Histories corrected. Elijah's mother's book turned golden. Her voice, no longer echoing pain, whispered, "Thank you." The final scribe took one last step and crumbled into parchment, scattered by wind that shouldn't have existed here. Silence fell. Lizette limped to Elijah's side, soaked and shivering. Did we win? He looked around, eyes wide with awe. No, he said quietly. We didn't win. We chose. The books began to sing. A soft, steady hum. Like breath. Like life. A new door opened at the edge of the archive. Not carved in stone, but growing out of living wood. The symbol above it, a blooming eye, not weeping. Lizette smiled. Ready for the next house? Elijah looked back at the sea of shells one last time. He thought of the others like him, born into legacy, buried beneath memory. And for the first time, he felt light. He took her hand. Let's keep walking. They stepped through the door. The archive behind them didn't weep. It remembered. And somewhere, far away, a new ledger began to write its first page. Not in ink, not in blood, but in hope. The end.